Hello varlets. In today's video, we'll be looking at an iconic weapon of the Warhammer 40k universe, the Thunderhammer. After doing a couple of pretty intensive reviews that involved a lot of calculations and tables, I was looking forward to reviewing something a lot more simpler and easy on the numbers. Today is not that day. For today, you will see that the Thunderhammer doesn't just give enemies a headache, it gives me one too. As we have two Thunderhammers, we'll be looking at similarities and differences for both weapons, as you would expect in a multi-weapon review. Let's dive in. Number 1. Damage profiles. Starting with the damage profiles, both Thunderhammers essentially share identical damage numbers on their attacks with a couple of exceptions. The first is that the Iron Helm's opening light attack, or light attack 1, is a horizontal swing that damages multiple enemies, which is in contrast to the Crucis Thunderhammer's light attacks, which are all overhead single target hits. This translates into the Iron Helm having a slightly easier time managing small groups with light attacks. But the lower damage of the light one means that it does have less lethality than the Crucis. Secondly, the Iron Helm's heavy attack 3 is a beefed up overhead attack and is the highest damaging attack of the Thunderhammers. Practically all regular enemies that take a hit to the head from this attack will die instantly. With that out of the way, let's take a closer look at the actual numbers and see what we can learn. Starting with the light attack profiles from both Thunderhammers, the first thing that you might observe is that either hammer struggles to reach any breakpoint naturally. While my rolls aren't perfect, the damage numbers are pretty still far from being able to take things out in one hit without perks, blessings and buffs. In fact, if you look at the heavy damage profiles for both weapons as well, with the exception of the Iron Helm's third heavy attack, they also struggle to reach many breakpoints naturally. The only breakpoint that it reaches without a problem is one-shotting Poxwalkers with headshots, and that's about it. In terms of weak spot and crit multipliers, the light attacks for both hammers have a stronger crit multiplier of 60% compared to its weak spot multiplier of 30%, but their heavy attacks all have the same 30% multiplier for both crit and weak spots. Overall, while the Thunderhammer's damage profiles are disappointing at face value, and could honestly use a buff, but we'll save that for a different video, we need to account for how we actually use it in combat and how that affects the practical breakpoint value of the weapons. Unlike some weapons, which involve just spamming either light attacks or heavy attacks alone, like the Crucis Thunderhammer or heavy swords, something like the Iron Helm is most effective when weaving in combos of heavy and light attacks together, like the Eviscerator. So, when it comes to calculating breakpoints, we'll need to account for the combos we'll be using as well, which leads us into the next point. Number 2. Weapon handling and combos. We'll start with the Crucis since its attack combos are straightforward. If you're facing single targets, use your light attacks and bonk them on the head, and block cancel to speed up getting into the next attack. If facing small groups, chain heavy attacks into each other and sweep the room while maintaining distance and space to move. Moving on to the Iron Helm, because it has a more varied moveset than the Crucis, you'll need to weave in heavy and light attacks to maintain an attack combo that is effective for different situations. In general, there are two combos that you will weave together depending on how familiar and comfortable you are with using the Iron Helm. The first combo simulates the Crucis Thunderhammer's heavy chain by opening with your light 1 and following with a heavy attack. Repeating this cycle kind of gives you the same feel as the Crucis but isn't nearly as strong. The second combo involves opening with a heavy 1-2 hit or even just one heavy hit, then resetting the attack chain with a push attack and back into a heavy 1-2 combo. The reality of using the Iron Helm is that you will be using both of these combos mentioned and weaving in push attacks to not only reset the attack chain, but to give yourself space to perform the combos as well. I can't emphasize this enough, weaving in push attacks is key to using the Iron Helm Thunderhammer effectively. However, to effectively use the Thunderhammers as a whole, it is almost necessary that you learn to weave dodging as part of your combat loop. The main reason you want to do this is since your mobility is limited while charging heavy attacks, using your dodge helps you close the distance between you and your target, letting you weave in and out of attacking distance to land a swing or to give yourself space to charge up the next attack. This is a case of show don't tell, so I'm going to show you what it looks like in the Psychinium from both a first person point of view and a third person point of view so you get the idea. Practice will make perfect, to a limit. As you can observe, or will find out on your own, the Thunder Hammers can only ever damage 3 targets. Everything else that gets hit gets sent flying to the side or on the floor. Slow hitting, poor breakpoints, and low cleave count make the Thunder Hammer one of the least effective weapons in dealing with large groups of enemies. I would even go so far as to say that I have a better time clearing a horde of 50 Poxwalkers with a knife than I do with the Thunder Hammer, simply because the knife is actually killing things and not spreading them out. So, from learning about its damage profiles and weapon handling, the Thunder Hammer is alright with small groups and strong against single targets, but becomes unwieldy and struggles with larger groups and hordes. Next up, number 3, Weapon Special, Thunderclap. This next point is going to cover the main reason why you'd use the Thunder Hammers in the first place, its weapon special activation, which I will be calling Thunderclap for the purposes of this video. Before we dive into the intricate details of the Thunderclap, let's go over some basic stuff about it first. First, activating the weapon special empowers your Thunder Hammer. The activation has an animation time of about 1 second, after which your Thunder Hammer is empowered for 3 seconds. Secondly, while empowered, your next attack will be a Thunderclap, dealing heavy damage and a powerful stagger to whatever your hammer happens to come into contact first. In the case of the Iron Helm Thunder Hammer, its Thunderclap can cleave through up to 2 regular enemies but will detonate upon hitting a third or coming into contact with an elite or special. Its Thunderclap also does less damage than the Crucis, but we'll take a closer look at that shortly. Thirdly, when your Thunder Hammer is empowered, it actually takes on its own damage profile. I know this because the Iron Helm's heavy Thunderclap does the same damage regardless of where in the attack chain you hit an enemy, even with its third heavy attack, which does a good deal more damage than normal. This basically means your Thunderclap has a light attack and heavy attack damage profile and doesn't distinguish attack chain differences. Of course, I can't talk about damage profiles without showing you the tables themselves, so here you go. These are the Thunderclap damage profiles for both light and heavy attacks of both the Crucis and Iron Helm Thunder Hammers. As always, you may use my tables as reference when deciding how you'd like to build craft your own hammer. I will say, however, that this time I didn't bother to include crits into the equation because the base testing was already very tedious, so you have to forgive me for not including them in the tables. Comparing the tables and looking at what stands out, we can pick on a handful of things. Number 1, Thunderclap attacks have pathetic weak spot multipliers against most armor types, especially the light Thunderclaps of the Iron Helm. That being said, damage is damage, so where possible, especially with your heavy Thunderclaps, you'll want to aim for the head. Number 2, while I do have tables for these numbers, it's probably less clutter for me to just tell you. The Crucis heavy Thunderclap does about 25% more damage than the Iron Helm for both body shots and weak spots. When it comes to light Thunderclaps, the Crucis also does 25% more damage on body shots, but does 38% more damage on weak spots. And finally, number 3, the Thunderclap does a substantial amount of damage to unyielding enemies, especially with the heavy attacks. You've probably also noticed the mutant armor type in the damage profile. I've taken the liberty of adding that there so you can see how much more damage you're going to need to one-shot a mutant. In addition to these tables, I've also assembled dedicated tables to show you the damage your Thunderclap will deal against each monster based on where you hit them. Have a look. Just like the damage profiles from before, we can learn a handful of things looking at the numbers. First off, heavy attacks on average deal around 260% more damage than light attacks. So where possible, always try and use heavy attacks since it's much more efficient for DPS against monsters. Number 2, unlike regular enemies, hitting monsters like Chaos Spawns and Plague Ogrins in their weak spot actually provides a decent damage multiplier of 35%. Hitting a Beast of Nurgle in the back pimple yields a weak spot multiplier of 146% compared to hitting it in the body, where you deal 20% less damage. On the other hand, Demon Hosts have a bit more going for them. They actually have built-in damage resistance, taking about 20% less body shot damage, like a Beast of Nurgle, and 11% less weak spot damage as well. With all these damage profiles laid up, we can now technically move on to the build recommendation stage of things. However, the Thunder Hammers hold a secret. Number 4, Hidden Mechanic, Smite Heretic. If you've watched my Hellbore review, you would have heard of the Hellbore having a hidden mechanic which I call Hell to Pay, where you deal bonus damage to certain armor classes. The Thunderclap also has this built in, except it works on certain enemies instead of armor classes. These enemies are both Drig and Scab Flamers, Poxhounds and Scab Bombers. Against these enemies, your light Thunderclap deals around 3 times more damage with the exception of Poxhounds, which take around 8 times more damage. However, the key point of knowing this mechanic exists is that your heavy Thunderclaps will practically always one-shot these enemies. I tested this mechanic using a very low damage Iron Helm Thunder Hammer, hitting a Flamer in the foot, and it still got one shot anyway. So, if you ever see these enemies and you have a Thunder Hammer, they might not know it yet, but they're already dead. You just need to follow through and send them back to hell yourself. Moving on. Number 5, Build Recommendations. Jumping right into the blessing table for the Thunderhammers, we've actually got a pretty sizable selection of blessings to choose from. But, as with most weapons, half the blessings are pointless or too weak to be worth it. While I don't usually point out a particular blessing, I want to take this opportunity to call out Shock and Awe. I'm pretty certain this blessing is coded wrongly. The theoretical benefit it provides has some merit, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't think I've ever gotten it to work, and its duration makes it impossible to use properly, nor can you ever get it to stack more than once. A shame, really. I hope this blessing gets looked at because it does have some use if it works the way it sounds. Anyway, let's start by establishing what we want our Thunderhammers to do. From everything we've learned about it so far, we know that the Thunderhammers are problem solver weapons. They are designed to take out problematic enemies rather than deal with pleb ads and regular shooters. Therefore, the build recommendation will be leaning towards maximizing the heavy Thunderclap. So, whenever I mention Thunderclap from now on, it's specifically the heavy Thunderclap and not the light. Alright, we're going to begin by identifying the anchor blessing for the Thunderhammers. Given we want to lean into the heavy Thunderclap, choosing Thrust as the anchor makes a lot of sense. In fact, because the power gain scales with how long you charge up your heavy attack, there's a fine art to knowing how long you need to hold an attack to reach a breakpoint given perks and other buffs. After Thrust, we really only have a handful of other useful blessings to choose from. The first of which is Momentum. Paired with Thrust, Momentum turns your Thunderhammer into a generalist weapon, being strong at single target problem solving, but has the sustainability to hold back a horde if needed. This isn't the ideal pairing, but it's not bad either, since one stack of Thrust alone is enough to reach the one-shot body shot breakpoint against Poxwalkers, not taking into account class feats. Our next choice is going to be a decision between Slaughterer and Headtaker. Both blessings accomplish the same thing. They each give you a power spike to push your damage up. However, in my opinion, and through a lot of playtesting, there is an objectively superior choice between the two, and that is Headtaker. This decision mainly boils down to what you want the Thunderhammer to accomplish, which is to take out problematic enemies as soon as possible. Given that Slaughterer is dependent on getting kills beforehand, and you only have a 3.5 second window to land a Thunderclap after your last kill, more often than not, Slaughterer won't be available for you to make use of it. Moreover, if you are faced with a patrol or a bunch of elites, I don't think you can take your sweet time killing ambient Poxwalkers to build up Slaughterer stacks. And if you face them directly, you definitely won't be building stacks fast enough for the power boost to matter anyway. Also, Slaughterer doesn't help you at all against monsters. Where Slaughterer does help is in dealing with groups of enemies like hordes or shooter packs, but even then, its benefit is limited since the Thunderhammer can only ever damage 3 enemies anyway. All the power you get from Slaughterer will mostly be used to send enemies flying around and sprawl on the floor. Just to reiterate, Slaughterer is not a bad blessing, but is definitely not the optimal one for the build path we've chosen. Now, let's talk about Headtaker. While Headtaker does give a much lower power bonus than Slaughterer, maxing out at 25%, the key benefit of Headtaker is that its activation condition is just to hit things. This means just by hitting a monster, you're able to build up an additional 25% power, which is like having an extra perk active on your Thunderhammer. No need to depend on having other enemies nearby. But wait, there's more. By leveraging on how on-hit blessings interact with other damage sources, we can almost always have Headtaker at max stacks whenever we need it to be. Because on-hit blessings just need something to be taking damage to activate, regardless of the source, by pairing our Thunderhammer with the Cantrell 9 Shotgun's Incendiary Shot or the Flamer, we can first set our targets on fire and quickly swap to the Thunderhammer with Headtaker. The burn damage will then cause Headtaker to start stacking, allowing you to gain a 25% power bonus without ever hitting anything with the Thunderhammer itself. It is for these reasons in being able to have a consistent power boost that my preferred blessing combo is Thrust and Headtaker. This goes for both Thunderhammers. Moving on, we're going to be looking at the perk recommendations for each of the Thunderhammers since their Thunderclap damage profiles are different. Starting with the Iron Helm Thunderhammer, getting plus unyielding damage is an easy choice since it pushes up your heavy Thunderclap breakpoint against Reapers to be able to one-shot headshot them. Of course, taking plus unyielding damage also contributes towards our damage output against monsters. Taking plus Maniac damage gives the Iron Helm's Heavy Thunderclap a power spike against Drake Ragers, Trappers and Mutants, allowing an unbuffed Thunderclap to one-shot bodyshot Trappers, while having max stacks of Thrust allows you to one-shot bodyshot Drake Ragers and Mutants. There is also a case for taking plus Flak damage, with the reason being, if you fully juice up your Thunderhammer with Headtaker stacks, full Thrust stacks, you can one-shot a Scab Rager. If you take the Preacher's Rising Conviction feat, where you gain up to 20% bonus damage, you can also reach the one-shot bodyshot breakpoint on Maulers. For the Crucis Thunderhammer, because it has a much stronger Thunderclap, the purpose of certain perks changes if you compare it to what we just talked about for the Iron Helm. Plus unyielding damage will never be a bad choice for the Crucis. While you can already one-shot headshot Reapers naturally, taking plus unyielding damage allows you to one-shot bodyshot them without Thrust or Headtaker stacks. It also adds a lot of damage against monsters as well, since your Thunderclap is stronger than the Iron Helms. Taking plus Maniac damage gives us the potential to one-shot body-shot Dreg Rages with 2 stacks of thrusts, and makes one-shotting mutants more forgiving since the Crucis is already capable of doing this with full stacks of thrusts alone if you have strong base stats. You can also take plus flak damage for the same reasons I mentioned for the Iron Helm, but it's a lot more forgiving on the Crucis since it hits harder. Finally, taking plus Carapace damage allows you to reach the one-shot headshot breakpoint for Maulers with full thrust stacks, and comfortably 2-shot body-shot Crushers with full thrust stacks as well. As you can see, the perk choices are practically identical, save for plus Carapace damage being useful on the Crucis. With that, the build recommendations for the Thunderhammer are done. But before I end the review, I want to make a special mention of one of the Preacher's feats, Thy Wrath Be Swift. Having this feat active allows you to always get your heavy attack off, even while getting hit by adds. If you are struggling to get in some good practice with the Thunderhammers because you keep getting interrupted, I highly recommend getting this feat as it provides a major quality of life improvement for slow weapons that depend on heavy attacks a lot. It also makes you unflinching when you're aiming your ranged weapons as well, allowing you to aim while under fire. Alright, this review has come to an end. I hope you found this video useful and have a better grasp on how to use your Thunderhammers. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Varlets.